They began walking towards the setting sun along Norris Road. The faraway hum of the traffic remained constant, not seeming to diminish, but not seeming to grow any either. The desertion was beginning to get on her nerves. She felt they were being watched, tried to dismiss the feeling, and found that she couldn't. The sound of their footfalls echoed back to them. 60 lost is underground horror. The business at the hedge played on her mind more and more, and finally she had to ask again, "Lonnie, what was it?" He answered simply, "I don't remember, Doris, and I don't want to." They passed a market that was closed. A pile of coconuts like shrunken heads seen back to were piled in the window. They passed a laundromat where white machines had been pulled from the washed-out pink plasterboard walls like square teeth from dying gums. The image made her feel queasy. They passed a soap-streaked show window with an old shop-to-lease sign in the front. Something moved behind the soap streaks, and Doris saw, peering out at her, the pink and tufted battle-scarred face of the cat. She consulted the workings and tickings of her body and discovered that she was in a state of slowly building time. It felt as if her intestines had begun to crawl slightly inside her. Her mouth had a sharp and pleasant taste, almost as if she had dosed with a strong mouthwash. The cobbles of Norris Road bled fresh blood in the sunset. It's Cthulhu Christmas, a December reading event that celebrates the writing of American author H.P. Lovecraft, as well as other stories comprising the wider Cthulhu mythos written by authors inspired by Lovecraft. Today, as part of Cthulhu Christmas, I want to talk about Crouch End, a story written by the master of horror himself, Stephen King. Published as part of the anthology New Tales of the Cthulhu Mythos, edited by Ramsey Campbell, and first published by Arkham House in 1980. Crouch End finds King writing in a characteristic Lovecraftian style, where a neo-Gothic phantasmagoric confessional segs into baffling and genuinely disarming recollections of cosmic horror. Or does it? Does the horror of Crouch End represent the actual physical intrusion of the fantastique onto the drab mundanity of some suburban North London enclave, with its labyrinth of grey streets and boarded-up shops? Or is it merely the feverish delusions of a character's terrified mind, pushed to new levels of anxiety and fear? In Crouch End, two constables working the night shift at a small police station in the London suburb of the title discuss the case of Doris Freeman, a young American woman who arrives at the station to report the disappearance of her husband. In the classic Lovecraftian style, the horror of Crouch End is told, never shown. King alternates between the recollections of the two police officers discussing their encounter with this fraught and frantic American, and the direct confessional of Doris herself, as she relates the terrifying chain of events that led to her husband's disappearance. Doris explains to the two officers how she and her husband got lost while searching for the house of a business acquaintance in the area of Crouch End. When they pull off onto a quiet street to use a phone box, the taxi they'd hired mysteriously disappears. Then the entire neighbourhood becomes strangely deserted, the only remaining signs of life being a cat with a scarred face, and two mocking foul-mouthed children, one of whom has a deformed hand like a crab's claw. The author doesn't try to disguise his influences here, with King citing Lovecraft directly. His characters discuss Lovecraft and relate the strange occurrences of the story back to the legacy of his work. This gives the story a self-aware, sometimes ironic distance, reminding us throughout that we're reading a story, a work of fiction that is one step removed from our own reality. However, the decision to cite Lovecraft directly has further implications that are worth commenting on. In an odd way, this grounding of Lovecraft within the world of the story helps to legitimize Lovecraft as more than just a mere author. By placing the author's work as an existing reality within the fiction of the story itself, King creates an insinuation, one where Lovecraft's stories are more than just the fevered imaginings of a literary neophyte, one who channeled his various bigotries and anxieties into bold and original works of pure 20th century horror, but more like a genuine reporter, an oracle or seer, someone who recorded in his fictions the actuality of the strange creatures and hidden worlds that exist within the shadows of our own. This in turn suggests to us that the past horrors of Red Hook, Arkham, Dunwich, and other eldritch places have one foot in the realm of a far darker reality, one that Lovecraft was able to break the surface of. Throughout the story, Crouch End is rich in Lovecraftian atmosphere. King captures the growing panic of Doris and her husband Lonnie as they find themselves trapped in a waking nightmare. The accumulation of small but specific details which King weaves into these observations or recollections, evoking a growing feeling of restless paranoia as the laws of reality begin to bend and break. The perspective of the characters as strangers, already navigating a country that is new and unfamiliar to them, is further distorted by the slow and unexplained shift into the realms of the uncanny. Here time seems to slow to an oozing crawl, and the heat and haze of an interminable British summer gives way to shocking revelations and encounters from beyond. The vivid recollections of Doris are then in turn grounded by the bickering responses of the two policemen, who attempt to grapple with the strangeness of the young woman's tale, and how it relates to the folklore and superstitions that remain a part of the community's rich history. This itself is a very Lovecraftian motif, in which a story that strains credibility in its full-bodied commitment to evoking strange interdimensional terrors is grounded by being recounted second-hand by characters who appeal to the laws of logic and reason. As these characters approach the horror through a lens of healthy skepticism, their eventual acceptance and even hysteria, as they're forced to come to terms with the true unspeakable horror of the situation, is meant to further assuage any feelings of skepticism felt by the reader, and in turn convince us that such terrors are entirely plausible and true. However, in Lovecraft's stories there is always a sense of ambiguity, and the same is true here as well. The reader is made to question whether the events described by Doris represent a genuine unfolding of something akin to cosmic horror, or is it an example of a character becoming overwhelmed by a stressful or traumatic experience, and as such giving way to pure insanity? If the latter is true, then the story could be seen as endorsing that Lovecraftian notion of madness as a contagion. The plague of madness, which passes from person to person as the sense of uncontrollable fear is planted seed-like within the fertile soil of the narrator's imagination, and indeed within the imagination of the reader. Lovecraft's horror comes from the realization that the world as we know it is a lie, that inside the pit of the earth itself there is a darkness that is deeper and blacker than the darkest heart of any human evil. The realization that our gods are the false gods, that they wither and die in the presence of the old ones, who reign over us from their palaces of lunatic constellations, there to strike down upon the heathens of the new world at any given time. If there is a horror in Crouch End, then it is the same horror that is encountered in stories like the horror at Red Hook, The Colour Out of Space, and at the Mountains of Madness. It's the horror that comes from pulling back the curtain and finding something there that once seen can never be unseen. It's the horror of knowing that we are not alone, and that we are not the gods of our own world, that there are dark forces greater than any one of us that exist in the darkest shadows, restless and waiting for the moment when they can return to their writhing thrones and enslave humanity for all eternity. As such, the characters are perhaps not as mad as we first believed. Perhaps it's more a case of them being sane in an insane world. One thinks of the character of Dr. Miles Bennell from Invasion of the Body Snatchers from 1956, the lone madman screaming at passing cars about an alien invasion that has already taken place. A ranting lunatic there to be feared or ignored like so many doomsayers before, and yet entirely correct in their grave warnings of humanity's end. The characters in Lovecraft's stories touch the surface of new worlds and are left irrevocably changed, even scarred by what they've seen and encountered. The same is true for King, and for the unfortunate characters of Crouch End. So that was my review of Crouch End by Stephen King, my first contribution to the Cthulhu Christmas December reading event. I am still hoping to review some of Lovecraft's individual stories, but unfortunately I am a bit behind schedule. This video took much longer to edit than I'd initially anticipated, But a lot of the techniques and ideas that I was experimenting with here are things that I'm hoping to carry across to my later videos on the Call of Cthulhu and the Colour Out of Space. As ever, thank you very much for taking the time to watch this video, and do like, subscribe and comment if you'd like to see more videos in the future. Thanks again for watching.